Hi there! The living room door suddenly swung open, and in walked Mike, followed by about 4 others in a line. Bringing up the rear with a creepy grin was Bob. "Hey, what's happening here?" I asked. "We're having a barbecue with friends today. Hurry up and get some meat and beer," Bob replied condescendingly. "Birds of a feather, I guess." Bob's friends joined in with crude smiles. That was the last straw. "I'm heading out for a trip, so I can't." Bob's face contorted in anger, as if I'd embarrassed him in front of his friends. Normally, I would have caved to his mood, but I was done. "Just be careful with the fire, okay?" I said, ignoring them as I left the house. A few hours later, I received a call saying my husband had been taken to the police station while on our trip. What on earth did he do? My name is Nancy Smith. I'm a 48-year-old government worker. My parents passed away in a car accident when I was in college. I've lived in the house they left me and managed to graduate from college using the insurance money and scholarships. Luckily, I landed a government job. Living alone was lonely at times, but my life was stable. The office I worked at was far from the house I lived in, so I rented out my family home and moved into a small apartment near my workplace. I rented out my house as it was, and since it was in a good location, it was rented out quickly. The tenant was a very kind person and, knowing my situation, said I could visit any time. Thanks to the rental income and my government salary, my life was more stable than most people my age. Around that time, I started enjoying visiting churches, museums, and old mansions. Time seemed to move slowly in these places, and they had a unique atmosphere that made me feel relaxed in some way and solemn in another, which I loved. I met my husband Bob at a book club for adults, which I was invited to by a friend. He was quiet and kind, and I was quickly drawn to him. Bob was very intuitive and took the lead, which helped because I was shy in relationships. After dating for 2 years, he proposed to me on my 29th birthday, and we got married the next year. Our daughter Emma was born, and we were incredibly happy. However, around that time, Bob's true colors started to show. I worked as well, so we had an agreement to share household duties. Bob kept his word until I was pregnant. But once I started maternity leave, he often went out for drinks, and once I was on parental leave, he stopped doing any house chores altogether. "Hey, aren't you in charge of the dishes?" "Please, what? You're just lounging around at home all day." "Why don't you do it?" Bob quickly got ready and left after saying that. Ever since Emma was born, he would go out for drinks about 4 times a week, and he never helped take care of her. Juggling housework while holding Emma due to her night feedings was tough and sleep-deprived, but when I voiced this out, Bob didn't understand at all. Instead, he ridiculed me, saying I was inefficient. My love for Bob decreased as the days went by. By the time Emma turned 5, I saw him merely as a roommate. Thankfully, I didn't have to work on weekends or holidays, and I never had to do overtime. That allowed me to spend quality time with Emma. Though Emma required a lot of attention, night crying and frequent breastfeeding as a baby, as she grew older, she became very independent. She was clingy during our moments alone, but she willingly helped with house chores and always thanked me for everything. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that watching Emma grow was my only joy. Bob, on the other hand, seemed indifferent to Emma. He'd only approach her when he was in a good mood. By that time, Bob's mask had completely fallen off. Not only did he neglect house chores and parenting, but he also went out drinking almost every day and came home, filling the air with women's perfume smell. But I had lost so much affection for Bob that I hardly cared anymore. Still, I didn't choose divorce to ensure Emma had a stable environment. To be honest, with the rental income from my family home and my salary, I could easily support Emma's education up to college, but I didn't want to risk Emma facing difficulties if something happened to my income. Luckily, Bob was good at his job, and even though he worked at a smaller firm, he earned more than I did. I decided to see him as someone contributing to Emma's education fund and our living expenses. However, by the time Emma entered high school, Bob's spending habits worsened. I had let him spend freely except for Emma's tuition and living expenses. However, one day I got a call from the school saying they hadn't received her tuition payment. In a panic, I transferred the money from my account. This incident made me realize that staying married had no benefits anymore. With that thought, I approached Bob, who was seriously looking at himself in the mirror. "Hey, the school called. They said Emma's tuition hasn't been paid." "Oh, so it's not. So is it? You promised to cover that." "But she's been acting so weird lately. She's always glaring at me." "That's just. She's at her rebellious age." I felt a headache coming on. Bob must have gone through that rebellious phase himself, yet he showed no interest in our daughter Emma's growth. Not paying for her tuition just because she's acting out is not only irresponsible as a father, but as a person as well. At that moment, I decided to divorce Bob once Emma would start college, and until then, I decided to play the role of a docile wife. Lost in my thoughts, I noticed Bob smirking at me. "What? I barely come home, so do I even need to contribute to living expenses? Instead, I'll pay for her tuition and stop giving money for other expenses." "Fine." I felt my determination waver at his words, but agreed nonetheless. It can't possibly be accepted not to contribute to living expenses from the start, but needing him to cover Emma's tuition was more important, so I begrudgingly accepted the money. Bob, once provided for living expenses, became his pocket money, and his lifestyle became increasingly extravagant. One day, as I was walking near the station after work, I saw Bob with a familiar-looking man, their arms around each other. Bob didn't notice me, but the man did and approached me. "Hey, aren't you Bob's wife? What are you up to here?" Well, I felt like I'd met him at our wedding, but I couldn't remember his name since Bob never introduced us. Even from a distance, I could smell the strong alcohol on him. How long had he been drinking? I tried to keep a smile on my face, suppressing my discomfort. "Oh, I'm Mike. Bob and I were in the same club in college. By the way, you're stunning. How about a night with me?" "Just kidding." "Hey, if you want this old lady, she's all yours." I was more shocked by Bob's words than Mike's crude remarks. No matter how drunk, no man should say that about his wife in her presence. "Really? Maybe I should book a hotel room then." "No, I'll pass. Thanks. I'm in a hurry." So chills ran down my spine, and I quickly left the scene. I could hear Mike and Bob talking behind me, but I chose to ignore them. When Bob came home late that night, by the next morning, he didn't even remember seeing me. When I asked him about Mike, Bob boasted something about him starting a lucrative business recently and that he had gone to hear about it. "Don't come asking for money when I get rich, all right?" I just replied to his fluffy words. Yeah, as long as he covered Emma's tuition. I had no more expectations from Bob. However, after Emma had started college, a major incident took place. It happened on the day I planned a solo trip to use up some of my accrued leave. After packing everything by the entrance, I took a little break. Bob, being chirpy, had left early in the morning, so I just left him a message he read. So I considered my duty done and sipped my tea. I then heard a noise from the entrance and thought Bob had unusually come back early. However, when I saw who came in through the open door, I almost spit out my tea in surprise. "Hey there!" Suddenly the living room door opened, and it was Mike. 4 or so more guys followed him in. Excuse me, what's going on?" "We're having a barbecue with friends today. Go buy some meat and beer quickly." Both Bob, with his lewd smile, and his friends were grinning at me. I felt it was the last straw that broke the camel's back. "I have a trip planned right now, so I can't." What Bob's face turned red and furious at the thought of having been embarrassed by me in front of his friends. Normally, seeing that expression would have made me panic and do as he said, but now, with my patience worn thin, I had absolutely no interest in Bob's mood. Just be careful with the fire, okay? Hey, ignoring all of them, I left the house. However, a few hours later at my vacation destination, I got a call that my husband had been taken to the police station. What on earth did he do? The call from the police was to verify his identity, and they told me there was no need for me to come there immediately. Apparently, the questioning was likely to take a while. They asked if I could prepare some clothes and such for Bob to stay overnight in detention. It seems he had given them my name and contact information. We can provide some basics and bill you later if that works. Oh, that's fine. Please bill him directly. Understood. If there's anything else, we'll contact you. Yes, thank you. It seems the reason Bob was taken to the police station was that he drunkenly tried to forcibly bring a woman walking by into his home. They caught him in the act, so there was no room for dispute. They said he'd likely be charged. On top of that, Mike is under suspicion for other matters, and there's a chance Bob might be involved as well. Hearing this, I slumped down in place, utterly drained. I was thankful to have reached my destination. Tears streamed down my face. Then a coffee was placed on the table in front of me. Mom, are you okay? What happened? Actually, my travel destination was the area where Emma attended college, and I was planning to stay at Emma's place during the trip. The call from the police came just as I had arrived at Emma's place and was about to relax. Your dad was arrested by the police. The reason is It's okay, tell me when you're calm, Mom. Maybe you should seriously consider divorcing him. You endured for my sake, right? I ranked first in my class this year. My professor told me I'd get a scholarship without any obligation to pay it back, so I'm okay. Emma, maybe you're right. Emma's words cemented my resolve. Part of me felt like a failure as a parent, letting my daughter speak this way. At the same time, I was overjoyed that Emma had grown up so wonderfully. A few days later, I received a call from the police that only Bob had been released. It seems Bob didn't know that Mike's business was involved in criminal activities, and he actually claimed to be a victim. Indeed, it was proven that Bob was innocent, and he was cleared of charges. A part of me was disappointed. The day after the call from the police, Bob called me. Honestly, I didn't want to answer the phone, but thinking about the future, I decided to pick it up. Hello. Ah, you picked up. Where are you? At Emma's place. There was a pause on Bob's end as he seemed to think, but he quickly returned to his usual demanding tone. I don't know where she lives. Just come home already. There's so much housework to do. Sorry, but I'm not coming back. What? Bob was taken aback by my firm rejection and seemed frozen in shock. Speaking into the silent phone, I slowly repeated, I'm not coming back. I want a divorce. What the hell are you talking about? Do you even understand? I didn't respond to Bob. At the same time, I heard the sound of a phone dropping on the other end. He must have been truly shocked. Taking the opportunity, I added, I'll have my lawyer contact you regarding the details. Expect a call from them soon. Hey, Nancy. Bob called my name, but I hung up without hesitation. Immediately after, I called the lawyer I had just hired the day before. The lawyer promptly reached out to Bob. Bob called me multiple times in response, but I ignored every single call. Next, I called my workplace. I had already been considering early retirement, and now seemed like the perfect time. I decided to move closer to Emma. Fortunately, I had an inheritance from my parents and consistent income from renting out our family home. Plus, with the severance pay, I would be financially stable on my own. It took about 2 months for me to wrap things up at work, so I rented a furnished apartment nearby for the interim. I worked from there, ensuring a smooth handover of my tasks. During that period, Bob kept calling, but my lawyer handled all communications. Bob was livid about the divorce and kept claiming, I didn't do anything, and you're just misunderstanding. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet up and talk things out, even setting a date. In time, even setting a date proved to be quite a challenge, But 3 weeks after proposing a meeting, we finally settled on a date. I braced myself for what would be the most crucial confrontation. On the day of our meeting, the man who showed up looked like a disgruntled middle-aged guy. "I'm not agreeing to any divorce. I was just deceived. I didn't do anything wrong. Let's discuss this after we're seated." In response to Bob's stubborn attitude, I calmly walked into the restaurant first. It was a high-end place with private rooms like individual cottages. This was the same establishment where Bob and I had dined to celebrate our engagement. "Do you remember this place?" Bob's lackluster response extinguished the last piece of my affection. After all, we had once promised each other a lifetime together. Hoping that recalling this place would make our discussion a bit more peaceful turned out to be wishful thinking on my part. "Let's start the conversation, shall we?" At my words, the lawyer seated beside me began laying out several documents. They were densely packed with records of Bob's actions, evidence of his infidelity, and details about the shady business Mike was involved in. Bob glanced at them with clear annoyance and let out a sigh. "What's this? If you got a beef with me, say it to my face. You're so passive-aggressive. This isn't about complaints. It's about laying out the facts for our upcoming discussion." Hearing this seemed to darken Bob's mood even more. Still, I had no intention of backing down. However, when another document was introduced, his face visibly changed. "Hey, this... Oh, didn't you know?" Attached to the paper was a photograph of a woman in a wedding dress smiling beside a man who was presumably her husband. Seeing the two of them, Bob's face turned pale. "That's the woman you've been seeing, right? Your boss's wife." I. It seemed like Bob genuinely didn't know. He looked flustered, a far cry from his previous arrogance. According to my investigations, Bob and this woman had been involved for around 3 years. Bob had considered divorcing me to marry her, but lately she had been distant. Turns out she had married Bob's boss even before meeting Bob. Apparently it was a shotgun wedding, and just recently they celebrated their 10th anniversary by taking wedding photos. And of course, evidence was mailed to Bob's workplace and scheduled to be handed to his boss today. She probably has received the notice by now. Speak of the devil. Just at the right moment, Bob's phone on the table rang, displaying his boss's name on the screen. Bob didn't answer, so I took the liberty to tap on Answer, switching it to speaker mode. A deafening yell blared from the phone, so loud you'd think the windows would break. "You've been deceiving me, cheating on my wife even during work hours. That's a betrayal to the company, too. Don't think you'll be safe at work starting tomorrow." I'm so sorry." Bob, in a tizzy, looked absolutely pitiful. There was no trace of the charm he once had when I loved him. I shook my head and tapped on the documents. "So, can I submit the divorce papers for now?" "No, I won't. Perhaps because his plans to remarry his affair partner were now ruined. Bob became even more stubborn about not wanting a divorce." Feeling cornered, I called out to someone beyond the door. "It seems this is troublesome. What should we do?" "Who's there?" Trembling with fear, Bob looked over to me for answers. I simply directed him to the door with my gaze. Hesitant at first, Bob's face turned an even paler shade when he saw the person who walked in. Dad, Mom, why are you here?" It was my parents-in-law. Bob didn't get along too well with my in-laws, and after our marriage, he forbade me from interacting with them. For him, they were the last people he expected to see. My mother-in-law gave me a slight nod before storming up to Bob and raising her hand with a loud slap. Bob's face turned red. My mother-in-law, even more flushed than him, began shouting, "How could you cheat on Nancy? A wonderful wife? What have you done, huh? Nancy and you haven't met since we got married. How do you know she's wonderful?" Before I could respond, my father-in-law intervened. "Nancy has been sending us letters once a month, updating us on Emma's growth. Recently, she and Emma have even come to visit. She's too good for a son who hasn't even reached out once since getting married. What the heck? Hey, didn't I tell you not to contact my family? What gives you the right to reach out without my permission?" Bob shouted, diverting his gaze from my father-in-law to glare at me. Actually, my in-laws own a farm and live together with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law. For some reason, Bob, who never got along with my brother-in-law's wife and always criticized her, was kicked out of the family home right after graduating from college. Bob probably kept me away from my in-laws because he was worried his bad behavior would come to light. When I found out from my in-laws, brother-in-law, and his wife that this was the case, I was stunned by my poor judgment in choosing a husband. When I sent a greeting card, they were kind enough to call me. That's how we secretly kept in touch. You deceived me. Who I associate with is none of your business. I don't want to hear it from a man who cheated repeatedly and got involved in shady business dealings, I retorted, and Bob froze, looking frustrated. However, he suddenly changed his tune. "Ha! You seem to have thought this all through, but I'm divorcing you. I won't be giving you a dime or our house. Why even bother saying that? Everything's going to Nancy," my mother-in-law said, pushing him slightly. He was taken aback. I coldly watched Bob for a moment, put the documents in my bag, and left the restaurant with my lawyer. Later, I went to the city court to submit the divorce papers. Although it was a swift process, I felt extremely relieved. Bob was exposed for having an affair with his boss's wife and engaging in it even during working hours. He got fired from his small company. Since he gave me all the money, he was left penniless. In the end, my in-laws temporarily took him back to their family home and later sent him off to live with distant relatives. Turns out, my brother-in-law's daughter got married last year, and she's about to return to her hometown for a baby shower. Because of past grievances, my sister-in-law hadn't forgiven him and even refused to let him into the house. During the summer, Bob spent one night in a small hut on their property. The next morning, a relative came and took him away. Although Bob's lover and her husband, who is also Bob's boss, didn't end up divorcing, she was forced to live with the boss's parents. It's said that she's constantly under the watchful eye of the mother-in-law, enduring her constant snide remarks and nagging. Once Bob apparently sneaked out of his relative's house to see his lover. However, it seems she was just using him for fun, because as soon as she saw him, she said, "Give me some money so I can get away." This is what the mother-in-law had heard through the grapevine from the relatives. He was devastated and returned to his relative's house. Now, he works non-stop, and when he does get a day off, he's under the watchful eye of his relatives and can't go out freely. Since my divorce, I've stayed close to my ex-wife's family, especially since they're Emma's grandparents. My brother-in-law and his wife are wonderful. We often share meals, making me feel like I've gained a new family. Anna was initially upset about the divorce, but surprisingly, she's happy with how things turned out. Since she lives nearby, we hang out twice a week. As for me, I've moved to an area with many churches and cathedrals. Diving into my hobbies, I own 2 homes, one in my hometown and one downtown, rented out to cover my expenses. This allows me to use my retirement funds and insurance for Emma's college, hobbies, and travel. Lately, I've been thinking I should have divorced sooner, given my relaxed lifestyle. With the notebook Emma gifted me, I'm off on